Hello everybody, welcome to this Blender tutorial. I'm Zack, and today I'm going to teach you the basics of texturing your object using UV coordinates. Excuse me if I sniff a bit, I'm coming down with a cold. So, you wonder, this is a great looking cube and all. If you go into the camera view and then press F12 to render, we get this sort of gray, plain-looking cube. Well, this is okay if you can go into the materials and make it green. Now I've got a green cube. But, what if you don't want a green cube? What if you want more intricate design in it? Say some wooden floorboards. How you would go about adding a texture to an object is you load up a two-dimensional image and you flatten the image out over it. So really what you see over the object is just a two-dimensional image. And sorry if you didn't know what I just did there. If you go down to the corner of one of these screens where you see the plus, then you can click and drag and make a new screen. However, I only want two, so if you go over to where the screen splits and you can change the size, you can right click and then click join area, and then I'll just join one of these together. Now, by default it opens up another view of what you had before, in this case a 3D view. I don't want the 3D view, I want the UV image editor, so we'll go down to this little button right here and change this from the 3D view to the UV image editor. So, now that we're in the UV image editor, you can go ahead and load up a two-dimensional image right here. Let's click open image, and I'm going to go ahead and navigate to a folder where I have saved my wooden floorboards texture. Alright, so it's displayed right here. Now, you have to flatten this mesh out over here, and that will display the texture over the object. So if you go into UV edit mode and click U, then you can click unwrap. So what we have here is a sort of square that has appeared over our floorboards. And believe it or not, actually every single face of this cube has been projected onto this image. If you click on one of these vertices and you can drag it, much like the way you can drag vertices over here, you can drag a vertice in the UV image editor. The only difference is that this is 2D and this is 3D. So as you can see, we actually have more sides overlapping each other. But this isn't exactly what we want. You can't just UV unwrap a texture by just clicking unwrap. We're going to have to add a little bit more control so Blender knows how to unwrap it. So what we're going to do is we're going to add seams to the object. So much like you would add seams to clothing. Now a shirt isn't just a shirt. A shirt is made up of different cuts of fabric sewn together, because you can't just have a 3D piece of fabric. You have to have a more flat piece of fabric that you then fold over to get a 3D image. So it works in almost the same way. If you have an edge selected and press Control E, then you get the edges menu. Now, the one we're looking for is the Mark Seam button. So now, as you can see, it has marked this, and it displays a sort of red color, and that indicates that there is a seam there. So, just to see what it's like, we'll go ahead and unwrap this again, and it's nothing. We have this sort of flat down here. It's even worse than it was before. So, we're going to have to add a little bit more control. Now, if you go to the edges menu again with everything selected, you can click clear seam, and we'll clear everything selected. So if you only want to clear a little bit of a seam, then you only select that part. But since I wanted to clear everything, it's easier just to select it all. Alright, so a good thing about a cube is it's easy to make an example of. If you've ever had, like, when you were younger, maybe in elementary school, where you would get a piece of paper and there were if I can draw it out on the screen, sort of, if you ever had a flat piece of paper and there were little fold areas for you to fold and tabs, and once you glued the tabs and folded it correctly, it would create a cube out of this flat piece of paper. It would usually be one square connected to another square connected to another square, and then from that first square would branch out one square and another square and another. There you can see that's actually exactly what we need. So it works in almost the same way. So if you go into, okay, we want to mark multiple seams at one time, but if you go into edit mode and you click these two vertices, you'll see that we have this edge selected. But we want this edge selected too. So now we have this edge and this edge. However, we also have these edges as well, and I don't want these edges selected. So what do? If you want to mark your seams, a better mode to go into is down here. Change this from vertex select mode and change it to edge select mode. That way you select one edge at a time, and you see if I click on this side, it is only the edges, and this edge doesn't turn out to be selected. Even though if you go into vertices select mode, it will select the whole face. Alright, so in kindergarten, when you had to do the whole paper folding to get the cube shape, you were working from 2D to 3D. But in Blender, you're going to have to work from 3D to 2D, and that can get a little bit more difficult. However, just bear with me. Okay, so this cube will be our main cube. Well, actually, we'll go around to this side. This cube, or this face right here, will be the main square that branches out into the other squares. So, first thing, that the square will branch out up in here and will tab. So, if we select all three of these edges up here and click Mark Seam, then you can see we have, this is sort of sectioned off. This area is no longer connected to this in the UV image editor. These are connected, this isn't connected, this isn't connected, and this isn't connected. So if this was a paper cube, there would be a tab here for you to glue, and that's how it would come together. Now, we go over to this side, and these will branch out, and then this will become its own tab where these two aren't connected, and these aren't connected down here. So I'm going to go ahead and mark this seam, and now it's sort of coming together. Now once again, like I did in the top view, I'm going to select these two. Whoops. So now that the main cube is branching out to this, this, and this, and we're going to mark the seam. Now the next part is a bit different, because if we were to end this right here, then there would be seams all around this, and this would become its own face. And that's not what we want. We want these to all be connected into one flat mesh. So instead of adding the seam here, we're actually not going to add a seam, so that way these are connected to this square, this is connected to this square, this is connected to this square, and this is connected to this square, which is connected to this square. And now, as you can see, if we press U and unwrap, you see what I'm talking about. Now, if you didn't really know what I was talking about before, don't tell me you haven't done a paper cutout thing where you've cut this out and you fold it along all these lines, and then you've glued on imaginary tabs that were at the end of these and created a 3D cube. Well, we have just deconstructed that cube over here. So, you know, now all the textures are on this cube. However, we can't see them. So if we go over here to this little tab down here and change it from its original solid state to textured shading, now we can see we have texture on our cube. So here's our main face where all of these branched out from. If you move this, you can see that we're moving the texture. If you zoom in right here, you can see that this light part is also this light part. So the face projected on here, each face looks like its original face and is projected onto this as a flat image, and wherever this is on the texture is where it will be on the cube. So as you can see, if I move this, well, I'll go back to the main cube so I can find it. If we move this texture, you can see it's starting to stretch and skew out of proportion. And what we are doing is, well, stretching the texture. And you want to keep the texture as least stretched as possible. This is a completely square face, which means in the UV image editor, this should be a square face too. As a general rule of thumb, however the quad or triangle is shaped in the 3D view is how it will be shaped in the UV image editor. And if it's not shaped the way it should be, then you'll have some bad stretching. Now, stretching can get so bad that, imagine that this is split into a triangle. We go down even further past this triangle and we have some impossible type of skew. Now, this is overlapping itself, and as you can see, this is some impossible mutations of the pixels right here, and I don't know if I can, I'm going to make it even worse. Oh yeah, so I'm zooming in on this right now, and as you can see, it's starting to morph around because you can't really calculate overlapping each other when this should be here and this is over here, but it's just being stretched over, and then this is overlapping it. You can't really calculate that, and it's having a hard time doing it, and it looks terrible. So you want to avoid that if possible. This is perfect. Now if we select these all and we scale this up, then this will become smaller because more area is being covered. If we scale it down, then we'll get bigger texture definition, and the more you scale in, you can see the pixels, and you know that's where a high resolution texture comes in. However, this texture is just fine because it looks great, and you wouldn't want it to be that big anyway. So now, hooray, we've added texture to our cube. Let's render it, and it's still a green cube. What's up? Well, that's because we haven't told the material to apply this texture to it. If we go over next to this material button over here in the buttons window, we can go and into the texture editor, or not the texture editor, the textures panel, and we can, it has already added a default texture. However, if you create a new material, you'll have to add it yourself by clicking new, and by default it will be set to clouds, and these are handy for other types. I actually use clouds a whole lot, but we're going to change it from clouds to image or movie. And now you can click open image and open up your UV texture. However, if you click this little tab right here, it will display every single texture that has been loaded into Blender's cache. So now we can just click it right there and it will open up. So now we have told the texture, or the material, to accept this texture. And once again, what is up? It's this weird lines, this weird stretching we're seeing. It looks nothing like it is over here. And that's because over here in the textures panel we also have to set its coordinates from generated to UV. So now it has accepted the UV coordinates over here as part of the material. Much better looking. As you can see, when you edit it, it will change it again in the render. So this is how you will texture a cube. However, there's more than one way to do it. If we go and click clear seam, excuse me, if we clear the seams and now we've reset it, we can you can actually unwrap things face by face. So if we go into face select mode over here, this little button, and we select one of these faces and click unwrap. Now we have unwrapped this face. And then we can unwrap this face. And so the difference between that is, you can see this face is its own thing, and this face is its own thing. As with before, when we had the seams, they would all be connected to each other. However, these can all move around freely now, and now are their own thing. And as you can see, this is big, and this is small, and when you render this out, well actually, let me change the lighting real quick, because that will be completely black in the render. Now you can see that's how it looks. Now, it probably looked a lot better before because wooden floorboards don't just randomly shrink at the corner. But both methods of texturing are very useful, and you'll probably know which situation to use them in. So, getting off this cube, let's go into a more advanced type mesh. Here I was working on a head. Okay. Alright, so here we can see this texture view is kind of annoying looking to me, but this is our UV coordinates right here. And don't mind the blue. I was trying to keep it from stretching, and you can show the stretching, but I'm not going to cover that. Okay, so as you can see, it's fairly complicated looking over here in the UV image editor, but when it's displayed, you can see the checkerboard texture is pretty consistent on the mesh. Now, if we were to, I'm going to go ahead and clear the seams and unwrap it again. This doesn't look good. And that's how seams come in handy, because you get this nasty stretching over here when you want it to be, you know, pretty consistent with its texturing. So actually, unwrapping this head was relatively simple. If I just go to the middle loop right down here and click Alt and click, or sorry, that's not the right view. Go into vertice select mode and do it. Then we get this result right here. I'm going to go ahead and finish this loop. So now we have a loop going all the way up through half of the face. So here, let me just, I have the inside of the mouth, I just want to make sure that it's not selected. Alright, so what I want is for there to be a seam going up from the neck over the head in the center and stopping up here. So just to kind of put this into perspective, when Blender flattens out an image, the problem is that this goes around in a circle, and you can't flatten out an object that is connected to itself in a circle. So what you have to do is have an area where Blender will split the image, that way it can actually be flattened out. For example, with a shirt again, you can't flatten out a shirt unless you cut it in half. So that's exactly what we're doing right here. If we click Mark Seam, and now we unwrap it, you can see that aside from these kind of weird things over here, it's probably because of the ears, they were unwrapped individually. Now we have a sort of head shape that sort of goes around like this. And just like the face right here, you will see that at this point it is split. So logically thinking, on the texture, right where this texture ends right here is where this texture begins. And that's why you can sort of see the stretching right there. Now you can actually work your way past this in the actual UV image, but you're going to have to add seams to your mesh no matter what. So you will get some cutoffs, and you'll have to know how to manage those properly. So actually, that's pretty much all there is to UV unwrapping a head. So it doesn't get too hard, you just have to know what you're doing. Now I would normally add a seam right here, and then I would unwrap it. And it just makes it a little bit more clean, because it has a lot of stretching if you don't do that. Anyway, so I have not made UV coordinates for this head, or I haven't made a UV image for this head yet. Let me show you what a UV image looks like. Now, what I have here is Zoe from the game Left 4 Dead, and I did not make this model. I have just imported the materials and the texture, everything from the game, and it actually comes into Blender pretty flawlessly. But you have to have a importer for it. It doesn't come with the importer in Blender. It's going to have to be a downloaded script. So if you want to know how to import source engine characters into Blender, you could let me know. But that's probably not something I'm going to be covering right away. So let's go ahead and... oh, darn. I changed the directory where these textures are located, so bear with me for a second here. I'll just re-upload this color texture. Alright, so back to where we were. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and load in this image. Oh, brother. Yeah, excuse me for a second, because this is not working the way it should be working. Okay, I kind of screwed it up just now, but just to show you that this is the texture used for the Zoe character in Left 4 Dead. So we go over here and see that in textured mode. It's kind of running slow. I think I have... oh no? Sorry, I'm working on a laptop, so bear with me. It's kind of running at a slow frame rate right now. That right here, there's a UV coordinate for the front of her jacket, her pants, and, you know, this back of her jacket. Well, actually, this might be the back of her jacket. This is the front of her jacket, front of the pants, back of the pants, and as you can see, it is on it was projected onto the mesh. So this is what a finished UV coordinate would look like on a complicated mesh. And this actually looks pretty complicated to make, but there's tools in Blender and Maya, which this model was actually made in, that will allow you to easily make some of these textures. However, you will have to do a whole lot of Photoshop editing. So to actually be experienced with Blender, you will have to have a pretty good knowledge of Photoshop and traditional art. So just a little disclaimer right there. Now, yeah, I think that's just about all I can cover right now. However, you can see this entire body has a UV texture. This is good for a game. I don't think I've ever seen a game that hasn't made the entire body entire mesh. However, when you're actually making a person for a render, usually people actually physically make the person, then make the clothes a separate object. And so instead the result would be the UV unwrap for the body would just be skin, the UV unwrap for the jacket alone would just be the entire jacket, and the UV unwrap for the pants would just be all the pants. That way you can use cloth simulation and you get better detail for the entire image. So the higher resolution the texture on here is, the higher resolution will appear in the render. And the more space you use up on the UV image, the better, because you get to have more detail in the space that the image offers. So these are things to keep in mind when you are unwrapping your objects. And this was just a quick little tip. My next tutorial will be covering actually making an object and texturing the object and rendering the object. And I have in plan a soda can. I wonder why I would make a soda can. It's just because I found it was a pretty good object, relatively simple to make, but not so simple that I wouldn't be able to teach you some more advanced features that would come in handy later for making things like this. And also because there's some pretty simple texturing and more than one material to have. So those are all good, and I think I'm going to show you how to make a soda can next time. See you around.